I never thought I'd be in a situation like this. My name is Mike, and for the last 10 years I've been happily married to Lisa. At least that's what I thought. We had our moments, sure, no relationship is perfect, but we seem to have a solid foundation. A few months back, though, things started to shift. At first it was subtle. Lisa began to work later and later, often coming home after I'd already had dinner. She claimed it was a big project at work, a massive push for a new campaign. I wanted to believe her. After all, she was ambitious and passionate about her job. I noticed little things, too. She'd leave her phone face down on the table, something she never used to do. I caught her scrolling through her contacts one night, and when I asked who she was texting so late, she just shot me a glare and said it was none of my business. I shrugged it off, convincing myself I was being paranoid. But deep down, a nagging voice told me something was off. Then one night, the universe threw me a curveball. I was asleep when I woke up around 2 a.m. Typically, Lisa would be right next to me, but that night the bed was cold. I checked the clock, squinting in the darkness. She wasn't home. I felt that pit in my stomach, the kind that makes your pulse quicken and your mind race. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe she stopped for drinks with coworkers, maybe she had to run an errand. But as the minutes ticked by, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was very wrong. When she finally came home, I pretended to be asleep. I couldn't let her know I was aware of her absence. I needed to gather my thoughts. I heard her shuffle around and mutter something under her breath. As I lay there, my mind spiraled. What if she was cheating? The thought made me sick. I had to know the truth, but how? A week later, the first step to uncovering the truth happened by accident. I was cleaning up around the house when I stumbled upon her laptop sitting open on the kitchen counter. Curiosity got the best of me, and in a moment of weakness, I decided to take a peek. I thought maybe I could find some clue that would ease my mind, if that was even possible. What I discovered, though, shattered everything. There in her email was a string of messages between Lisa and a voice actor named Jason. I had never heard of him before. They were flirty and intimate, filled with inside jokes and promises to meet up. My heart sank as I read through their exchanges. It was clear they had crossed a line. The way she spoke to him, the affection in her words, struck me like a slap in the face. I felt a roiling mix of anger and betrayal. This wasn't just an emotional affair. It was blatant infidelity. I had to confront her. The anger bubbling inside me surged to the surface, and my heart raced as I waited for her to come home that evening. Every second felt like an eternity. When she walked through the door, I knew I needed to be calm, but my emotions were all over the place. I watched her as she tossed her bag aside and headed straight for the fridge, completely unaware of the storm brewing. "Lisa, we need to talk," I said, forcing my voice to be steady despite the whirlwind inside me. She froze, her eyes darting to me and then back to the fridge. "What about?" she asked, a hint of annoyance creeping into her tone, like I was interrupting her after a long day. I took a deep breath. "I found something you need to explain." I placed the laptop on the coffee table, the screen still open to the incriminating emails. Her reaction was not what I expected. She let out a nervous laugh and rolled her eyes. "Oh, come on, Mike, you can't be serious. Those are just harmless texts." "Harmless?" I shot back, my voice rising. "Harmless texts don't involve meeting up in private." I could feel my pulse in my throat, the anger mixing with betrayal, and I needed answers. She tried to defend herself. "It's not like that, he's just a friend. You know how I am with my work, and he's supportive." I interrupted, my voice shaking with rage. "You've been lying to me for who knows how long. This is not just some innocent friendship." As the confrontation escalated, I could see the cracks in her facade. The woman who once seemed so loving and devoted was now defensive and frantic. The realization hit me hard. She was not the person I thought she was. My heart raced as I prepared for the emotional fallout. Her excuses poured out, but they felt empty. I didn't want to hear any more of her lies. The anger was consuming, and I could feel the weight of betrayal dragging me down. This was not how I envisioned my life, my marriage. I tried to process everything, but the emotional impact of that night was just the beginning of a long, winding road ahead. As the reality of her betrayal sank in, I felt a deep sadness that I had never experienced before. I needed to decide how to move forward, armed with the treachery I had uncovered. What would I do now? I had to take control of the situation. Little did I know, revenge was going to be part of my journey. After that night, everything changed. The house felt suffocating, the air thick with anger and resentment. Lisa and I navigated our days like two strangers sharing the same space. There were no tender moments, no inside jokes, just an unspoken tension that hung between us like a heavy fog. I wanted to scream, to cry, to throw things, but I felt paralyzed. I knew I had to make a decision, but whenever I thought about leaving, a part of me still clung to the hope that we could fix this. Maybe she would realize how much she had hurt me and genuinely want to work on our marriage. But then I'd remember those emails, the laughter she shared with another man, and my resolve would harden. The more I thought about it, the more I realized that I didn't just want to move on from this betrayal. I wanted revenge. Not the kind that involves petty acts, but something that would leave a mark, a statement. I wanted her and Jason to understand the consequences of their actions. The thought of them laughing together, thinking they got away with everything, made my blood boil. I began to hatch a plan. I had a passion for storytelling and had dabbled in podcasting on the side as a hobby, but now it felt like the perfect outlet. I had ideas swirling in my head, stories about relationships, infidelity, and the emotional roller coaster that followed. I could share my own story, and in doing so, I could ensure that Lisa and Jason would hear about it. I wasn't just going to be another sad husband. I was going to be a voice that inspired others to speak out against betrayal. I started putting together a podcast titled Broken Trust. The concept was simple. I'd share my experiences with infidelity and invite guests to share theirs. I wanted to create a community, a space for people to reveal their truths and find solace in shared experiences. I figured it could even help someone else who might be standing where I had once stood, facing the betrayal head-on. As I recorded my first few episodes, I channeled all of my anger and sadness into my words. I spoke candidly about my situation, about Lisa and Jason. I didn't hold back. I detailed the pain of betrayal, the feelings of inadequacy, and the lingering questions that haunted me. My voice carried that weight, and as I shared my story, I could feel the catharsis lifting the burden I had been carrying for weeks. One night, as I sat in front of my microphone, I decided to dig deeper. I wanted to expose not just the affair but the facade of the perfect life we had created together. I knew Lisa was still following my podcast, and I had no doubt that Jason would eventually hear about it too. I'd already started promoting the show on social media, and the initial feedback from listeners was overwhelmingly positive. People were relating to my experiences, sharing their own stories of heartbreak and betrayal. Months passed, and my podcast began to grow. I started receiving messages from people who had similar experiences, and the sense of community I had envisioned was coming to life. I felt invigorated. I wasn't just a hurt husband anymore. I was someone who had turned pain into purpose. My voice was being heard, and I was slowly rising in prominence as a podcaster. Lisa, on the other hand, was oblivious to the growing storm. She still thought she could play the role of the loving wife, but I could see through her act. She would come home and ask about my podcast, pretending to be supportive, but I could feel the tension in her questions. It felt like she was probing for information, perhaps trying to gauge how much I truly knew or what I was sharing. I kept my responses vague, allowing her to think I was still processing everything. Her facade began to crack when she noticed the attention I was gaining. Friends, family, and even colleagues were tuning into my podcast. I received invitations to speak at events, and opportunities to collaborate with other creators began pouring in. Meanwhile, she seemed to shrink into herself, her previous confidence faltering as she saw me flourish. I could see the jealousy creeping into her eyes, and it fueled my determination to keep going. Then, one fateful evening, I was recording an episode discussing the impact of infidelity on the betrayed partner. I recounted my story, and my emotions ran high as I shared how Lisa's affair had shattered my trust. When I finished, I hit publish and prepared to share it across social media. I didn't know it then, but that episode would mark a turning point in both my life and Lisa's. The next morning, I woke up to an explosion of notifications. Listeners were engaging in the comments, sharing their thoughts and experiences. But it was the message from Lisa that caught my eye. It was a long one filled with anger and accusations. She called me cruel for sharing our story, claiming I was dragging her through the mud. I could almost hear her voice, filled with that familiar bitterness as I read her words. That was the moment I realized my plan was working. I had taken my pain and turned it into a platform that shone a light on her betrayal. I had become a voice for the voiceless, and it felt incredible. Lisa would have to confront the fallout of her actions, and I was ready to embrace every bit of it. As I prepared for the next episode, I felt a newfound sense of purpose. I was no longer a victim. I was a storyteller, a creator, and someone who had taken control of my narrative. I was ready to dive deeper into the emotional ramifications of betrayal and share them with the world. I didn't just want to be heard. I wanted to rise above, to show that even in the darkest moments, there could be light, healing, and ultimately, revenge. As the days turned into weeks, the podcast continued to gain traction. My growing audience was a powerful reminder of how many people were affected by infidelity, people who felt lost, betrayed, and alone. The stories that flooded in from listeners were heartbreaking, yet they reinforced my resolve. I was no longer just sharing my pain. I was creating a safe space for others to confront their own. But with visibility came complications. Lisa's reaction to my podcast was expected. She was furious. Each day brought a new confrontation. She would storm into the room, her face flushed with anger, demanding to know why I was airing our dirty laundry. I stood my ground, reminding her that she was the one who had made our life public by choosing to betray the trust we had built. "I'm not the one who cheated, Lisa," I'd say, and each time it felt like I was striking a match on her simmering resentment. The tension escalated, and I found myself reveling in the chaos. In those moments, I felt empowered. With every heated argument, every accusatory stare she threw my way, I was reminded of why I had started this journey. I was taking control of my narrative, and she couldn't handle it. It was as if I had flipped the script, and she was now the one on the defensive. One evening, after another intense confrontation, I decided to record an episode that would address the dynamics of power in relationships, particularly how infidelity can disrupt that balance. I spoke candidly about how I had felt small, belittled, and betrayed. I wanted to convey the message that it was okay to reclaim your voice, to take back your power. I hoped that by sharing my experience, others would feel encouraged to do the same. I released the episode and it struck a chord. Listeners praised my honesty, expressing gratitude for shining a light on issues they had faced. The response was overwhelmingly positive, and I could feel the momentum building. People were sharing my podcast, tagging me on social media, and reaching out for advice. I had become a voice for the betrayed, and it felt good. But it also made Lisa increasingly desperate. She didn't like the attention I was receiving, and her jealousy bubbled beneath the surface. One night she confronted me again, her tone venomous. "You think you're some sort of celebrity now, just because you have a few listeners. You've made a fool of yourself, Mike." "I'm not a fool, Lisa. I'm speaking the truth. You're the one who should be ashamed," I fired back, my patience wearing thin. The more she pushed, the more I leaned into my podcast. It was as if my pain was transforming into a weapon, and I was learning to wield it with precision. One day, I received an email that changed everything. A producer from a popular media outlet had heard my podcast and wanted to collaborate on a special project. They were interested in creating a documentary series about the impact of infidelity and wanted to feature my story as the central narrative. I couldn't believe it. This was a chance to bring my message to an even larger audience, to further amplify the voices of those hurt by cheating. I was ecstatic. This was it, my chance to not only share my pain but to showcase the stories of others like me. When I told Lisa about the collaboration, I expected her to be supportive, maybe even proud. Instead, her reaction was explosive. "You think this will make you famous? You're just a pathetic man trying to capitalize on your own misery," she shouted her face twisted with rage. Her words stung, but I brushed them off. I was done feeling ashamed. I had embraced my story, and I wasn't going to let her shame me into silence. "I'm doing this for me, Lisa. I'm reclaiming my narrative, and you can't stop me," I said, my voice steady. The documentary process began, and I found myself interviewing people from all walks of life. Their stories mirrored my own, but also offered unique perspectives on the complexities of love, trust, and betrayal. It was cathartic, and my confidence grew with every interview I conducted. I was realizing that the pain I had endured could be a source of strength, not just for me but for others as well. As the documentary took shape, I began to think about my future beyond the pain. I was no longer just a husband betrayed. I was becoming a figure in a community that was desperate for connection. I wanted to help others find closure, to inspire healing, and maybe even help them find their own paths forward. Yet, amidst all the progress, Lisa remained a looming presence. She often attempted to sabotage my efforts, spreading rumors about me among friends and family, claiming I was exploiting our marriage for fame. It was disheartening to hear whispers, but I learned to rise above it. The more she fought back, the more fuel it added to my fire. I continued to record episodes for my podcast and participate in the documentary interviews. I shared my story authentically, detailing not just the betrayal but the journey of healing that followed. People were relating to my experiences, and I was finally starting to feel like I was making a difference. Then, during one of my podcast episodes, I decided to read an excerpt from Lisa's email accusing me of being a pathetic man. I explained how that type of language perpetuates the cycle of shame and blame that often follows infidelity. It was raw and real, and I knew it would resonate with my audience. Lisa listened in on that episode, and I could feel the shockwaves ripple through her as she realized how far I had come. The bitter truth was finally setting in for her. My pain had transformed into power, and she had inadvertently helped me create a platform that was changing lives. I was ready to embrace whatever came next, armed with my story and the strength I had found in my community. No matter what she did, I was determined to rise above, and I was ready to reveal the final act of my revenge. The best part, I was just getting started. The documentary was finally underway, and I was stepping into a new role that felt strangely exhilarating. I was not just a participant. I was becoming the face of a movement that challenged the stigma around infidelity and betrayal. With each interview I conducted, I witnessed the raw emotion and vulnerability of others who had been through similar experiences. It was powerful, and I could feel a change within me as I embraced my role in this narrative. As the production team filmed, I often thought of Lisa. I wondered how she was feeling about all of this, especially as my podcast continued to gain followers. While I was out sharing my story and empowering others, she was sulking at home, perhaps regretting her choices. I had a strange sense of satisfaction at the thought, but I was also aware that deep down, I was still grappling with the hurt she had caused me. I needed to confront that feeling and find a way to move on completely. One night, I returned home after a long day of filming. The house was dark, and a sense of unease washed over me as I entered. I flipped on the lights and found Lisa sitting at the kitchen table, staring blankly at her phone. It was a sight I had become all too familiar with, her anxiety, her bitterness, her resentment manifesting in one form or another. "Hey," I said cautiously, not wanting to provoke her further. She looked up, her eyes narrowing. "You're getting quite the following, aren't you?" There was an edge to her voice, a mix of jealousy and bitterness that made my stomach churn. I took a deep breath, preparing for what I knew would be another confrontation. "It's not about that, Lisa. It's about helping people. It's about sharing my story and giving others a voice." Her response was a scoff. "Right, because exploiting our marriage is the best way to help people. You're just making yourself the victim in front of everyone." The anger bubbled inside me. "I didn't choose to be the victim, Lisa. You did. That to me, I'm just trying to turn this pain into something positive." But she wasn't buying it. "You think you're some kind of hero now? You're not. You're just a man who can't let go of his own misery." I felt a wave of frustration wash over me. "I'm not wallowing in misery. I'm taking control of my life. I'm not hiding anymore." We stood there, locked in a battle of wills. I could see that beneath her anger there was fear, a fear of losing the control she once had over our relationship. But that wasn't my concern anymore. I had started to build a life beyond the pain, and I was determined to keep moving forward. The next day, during an interview for the documentary, I was asked about the emotional impact of infidelity. I found myself speaking from the heart, sharing not only my story but also the lessons I had learned along the way. It felt liberating. I had evolved from a victim to a survivor, and it felt so empowering to articulate that transformation. As filming continued, I started to explore deeper themes in my podcast as well. I spoke about forgiveness, healing, and the complexities of love. I interviewed therapists, relationship experts, and even other individuals who had found themselves in similar situations. The discussions became more profound, and listeners responded with overwhelming support. I began to receive messages from people thanking me for being honest and encouraging them to embrace their own healing journeys. But with each new victory came reminders of my past. Lisa would often bring up my podcast in a disparaging manner, insisting that I was ruining any chance of reconciliation. "Nobody wants to hear your sad little story, Mike. You're just a cautionary tale," she'd say, her tone dripping with disdain. I used to feel hurt by her words, but now they felt like mere echoes of a past life. I was no longer that man who would shrink in the face of her accusations. Instead, I was growing stronger, more resilient. I had a community that supported me, and I was determined to show Lisa that I wouldn't be silenced. One evening, as I was preparing for another episode, I received an unexpected message from Jason, the voice actor. He had clearly been listening to my podcast and was reaching out to apologize for his role in everything. The message was surprisingly sincere, filled with regret for the affair and an acknowledgement of the hurt he had caused. Part of me was tempted to respond with anger, but instead, I decided to take a different route. I wrote back, thanking him for his honesty and letting him know that I hoped he had learned from the experience. I didn't want to dwell on the past. I was focused on my future. As I recorded my response to Jason's message, I realized that this was part of my healing journey. Forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting. It means releasing the hold that past events have on you. I wanted to share this thought with my audience, hoping it would resonate with others who were struggling to move on from betrayal. The episode dropped, and the feedback was incredible. Listeners shared their own stories of forgiveness and healing, and I felt a sense of community and connection I had never experienced before. My podcast was becoming a beacon of hope for those navigating the stormy seas of infidelity. But Lisa wasn't done fighting. She confronted me again, her anger boiling over. "You think this is all just going blow over? You're humiliating me, Mike." I took a deep breath, reminding myself that I couldn't let her words affect me the way they once did. "This isn't about you, Lisa. This is about healing and sharing stories that matter. You made your choice. Don't act like you're some kind of martyr here," she hissed, her voice low and filled with venom. "You're just trying to make yourself feel better at my expense." I couldn't let her guilt trip me anymore. This isn't about making myself feel better. It's about being honest with myself and creating a space for others to share their truths. You don't get to dictate how I process my pain. The confrontation felt monumental. I was standing my ground, refusing to let her manipulate my emotions. I had grown stronger in ways I never thought possible. As I prepared for the release of the documentary, I felt a mix of excitement and apprehension. It was a culmination of everything I had been working toward, and I was ready to share my journey with the world. I had transformed my betrayal into a powerful narrative, and it was time to let go. The weight of the past. The night of the premiere was electric. I had gathered friends, family, and supporters to watch the documentary together. As the credits rolled, I felt a wave of gratitude wash over me. I had come so far from the hurt and betrayal that once consumed me, and I was finally ready to embrace the future. In the days that followed, the documentary received rave reviews. People were connecting with my story, sharing it on social media, and opening up about their own experiences. I had created something meaningful that resonated with so many, and I was proud of what I had accomplished. But I knew this was just the beginning. I still had my own healing to do, and I was ready to embrace whatever came next. I had transformed my pain into purpose, and I would continue to share my story until the day I could finally close this chapter of my life for good. I was reclaiming my narrative, one episode at a time. The aftermath of the documentary premiere was surreal. I felt like I was living in a dream, one where I had transitioned from a betrayed husband to a voice of empowerment. The support poured in from every corner. Listeners were reaching out, sharing their stories of heartbreak, recovery, and newfound strength. I was no longer sitting in the shadows. I was standing in the light, and it felt incredible. However, for Lisa, it was a different story. As the views on the documentary surged, she became increasingly agitated. I could see the toll it was taking on her. Her facade of confidence was fading, replaced by desperation and bitterness. She would often try to engage me in discussions about the documentary, but I could see her frustration simmering beneath the surface. "Why do you insist on dragging my name through the mud?" she would demand, her voice laced with venom. "You're making me look like the villain." "You made those choices, Lisa. I'm sharing my truth," I'd respond, my patience thinning. "You can't expect me to stay silent while you try to turn this around to make me feel guilty." Every confrontation felt like a battle I was ready to fight, but I also knew I had to be careful. I didn't want to lose sight of my objective, healing and helping others. I was proud of what I had created, but I couldn't ignore the emotional whirlwind that was still swirling around me. One evening, after a particularly heated argument, I sat down to record another episode for my podcast. The topic was about moving on after betrayal, an exploration of how to rediscover oneself after losing faith in a partner. As I spoke into the microphone, I felt the weight of my experiences pouring out of me. The relief was cathartic. This was what I was meant to do. I shared vulnerable anecdotes, recounting moments of loneliness and despair, but I also spoke about the strength I had found through this journey. It was empowering to articulate how I had transformed my pain into purpose and how others could do the same. I emphasized that healing takes time and that it's essential to surround oneself with supportive people who uplift you rather than drag you down. As I wrapped up the episode, I felt a sense of clarity wash over me. I was no longer the scared husband who feared losing everything. I was a man who had reclaimed his life. But just as I was feeling uplifted, a notification pinged on my phone. It was a message from Lisa, and I braced myself for impact as I opened it. "Mike, I need to talk. This has gone too far," she typed. "We need to figure this out because what you're doing is damaging us both." I felt a surge of anger rise within me. "Damaging us both?" I typed back, my fingers flying across the screen. "You damaged this when you chose to betray me. I'm not the one who needs to figure anything out, you are." I hit send, feeling a mix of satisfaction and dread. I knew we needed to have a conversation, but I was tired of her trying to manipulate the narrative in her favor. It was time for me to take a stand. The next day, Lisa confronted me again. "You need to understand that this isn't just about you. You're affecting everyone around us," she said, her voice raising a notch. "Maybe you should have thought about that before you cheated. Why should I protect your reputation when you didn't protect mine?" I shot back, my patience evaporating. The truth was, I had been holding back my anger for too long. I couldn't keep pretending that I was okay with the way things had turned out. I had spent months trying to find my voice, and it was time to let it be heard without fear of her objections. "Mike," she started, her tone softening slightly, "I know I messed up, but I think we can still salvage something from this. I don't want to lose you." Her words hung in the air, heavy with unspoken emotions. I could see the cracks in her facade, the realization that she had lost control of the narrative. But I was no longer her backup plan. I was beginning to think of my future and what I wanted beyond this relationship. "Lisa, I appreciate that you want to talk, but I need you to understand that I am moving forward. I'm not going to pretend everything is fine between us. You made your choices, and I'm not responsible for your feelings anymore. I'm focused on my healing." The look on her face was a mixture of disbelief and frustration. "So that's it. You're just going to walk away." "Maybe not walk away entirely, but I need space." I Keep doing this back and forth with you while you refuse to accept the reality of your actions. I replied, feeling a wave of conviction wash over me. That conversation marked a turning point. I realized I didn't have to keep fighting her battles. I had been shackled by her guilt and anger for far too long. Now, I was reclaiming my narrative, not just on my podcast, but in my life. I decided to take a step back from the relationship to allow both of us to reflect. I focused on my podcast, continuing to share my journey and inviting others to join in on discussions about healing and empowerment. The community continued to flourish, and I felt inspired by the stories of resilience shared by my listeners. As I leaned into my new path, I began to consider what my future might look like. I allowed myself to dream again about new ventures, travels, and perhaps a time when I could truly let go of the pain that had held me back. But as with every journey, there were bumps in the road. I would occasionally receive messages from Lisa, some filled with anger and others with hints of remorse. I didn't respond right away. I was learning to prioritize my emotional well-being over the chaos she created. Then one day, when I least expected it, I received a message from a listener who had been deeply moved by my podcast. She had gone through a similar experience and wanted to share her story on the show. The idea of giving others a platform to share their journeys of healing excited me. It felt like I was building something bigger than myself, a community of support and understanding. As I prepared for the upcoming episode, I reflected on how far I had come. Through the pain, betrayal, and heartache, I had found a sense of purpose and a path toward healing. It wasn't just about revenge anymore. It was about empowerment, connection, and helping others navigate their challenges. With every story I shared and every voice I amplified, I was reminded that healing is a journey that often leads to unexpected places. And in this journey, I was not just reclaiming my narrative, I was learning to embrace my future. I had transformed my pain into purpose, and I was ready to let go of the past once and for all. As I prepared for the next episode of my podcast, I felt a surge of anticipation. I had been receiving numerous messages from listeners eager to share their stories, and it was becoming clear that this community was growing into something special. I had created a space where vulnerability was welcomed and healing was possible, and I was proud of what we had built together. The listener who had reached out to me was named Sarah. She had been listening to my podcast since the beginning and resonated deeply with my journey. We set a date for her appearance on the show, and I felt a mix of excitement and nervousness. It was one thing to share my own story, but inviting someone else to share theirs was a leap into the unknown. The day of the recording arrived, and I made sure my equipment was ready. When Sarah joined the call, I could sense her nerves. "I've never done anything like this before," she admitted, her voice shaky. "Neither had I when I started," I reassured her. "Just speak from your heart. This is a safe space." As we began the conversation, I listened to her recount her own experience with infidelity. It was heart-wrenching yet familiar. I could see the pain in her eyes as she spoke about betrayal and heartbreak. She had transformed that pain into strength, much like I had, and it was an honor to share that moment with her. Throughout the recording, I felt a mix of emotions. I was reminded of my own journey, the ups and downs, the moments of despair and eventual empowerment. When Sarah finished sharing her story, I felt compelled to reflect on how powerful it was to hear her truth. "Thank you for opening up and sharing your story with us," I said, my voice full of sincerity. "It takes courage to speak about our experiences, and I know this will resonate with so many who are listening." After the episode aired, I was flooded with comments and messages from listeners expressing their gratitude for both of our stories. It was a reminder of why I had embarked on this journey in the first place, to create a community where people could find support and healing. I felt a sense of fulfillment that I had never experienced before, but even as I embraced these moments of triumph, Lisa was still a presence in my life. She continued to reach out, alternating between anger and desperation. One evening, she sent a message that made my heart race. "Can we talk? I need to see you. I've been doing a lot of thinking." I paused, contemplating how I wanted to handle this. Part of me wanted to ignore her, to continue forging ahead without looking back. Another part felt the nagging need for closure. I decided to meet her for coffee, knowing it might be the last chance to lay everything on the table. When I arrived at the cafe, I felt a mix of apprehension and determination. Lisa was already seated, her expression unreadable as I approached. "Thanks for meeting me," she said softly, her eyes downcast. "Let's just talk, Lisa," I replied, trying to keep my tone neutral. "What did you want to say?" She hesitated, gathering her thoughts. "I've been reflecting on everything, the affair, the podcast, how I've treated you. I realize now how selfish I've been," she admitted, her voice breaking. "I was so focused on my own needs that I hurt you without thinking." I listened intently, my heart both heavy and hopeful. "It's taken me time to realize that I can't change what you did, but I'm glad you're finally acknowledging how your actions affected me. It's a step, but it doesn't fix everything." "I know," she said, her voice trembling. "I just wish I could take it all back. I miss you, Mike. I miss us." I took a deep breath, feeling a mix of emotions swirling inside me. I'm not the same person I was before, Lisa. I've grown and I've learned so much about myself during this journey. I can't go back to how things were. Tears welled in her eyes, and for a moment I felt a flicker of empathy. "I don't expect you to forgive me. I just wanted you to know that I see the damage I've caused and I'm sorry." Her sincerity was palpable, and for the first time I felt a sense of closure wash over me. "I appreciate your apology. It takes courage to admit when you're wrong, and it helps me find peace. But I think it's best for both of us if we focus on moving forward separately." She nodded, a look of resignation on her face. "I understand. I hope you find happiness, Mike. You deserve it." As I left the cafe, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. I had confronted my past, found closure, and was finally ready to move on. I was grateful for the lessons I had learned through my pain, but I was also eager to embrace the future with open arms. With my podcast thriving and the community continuing to grow, I realized this journey was far from over. I had transformed my heartbreak into a source of empowerment, not just for myself but for countless others. I had learned that healing is a continuous process, one that requires vulnerability, courage, and the willingness to embrace change. As I sat down to record the next episode, I felt a renewed sense of purpose. I was excited to share my journey with my listeners, to remind them that while betrayal can leave deep scars, it can also lead to profound growth and transformation. I was no longer the man defined by his pain. I was a storyteller, a creator, and a symbol of resilience. And with that realization, I felt ready to tackle whatever lay ahead, armed with my voice and the stories of those who had walked similar paths. It was time to embrace the future, to continue sharing, and to honor the journey of healing that we were all on together. The story wasn't just mine anymore. It was ours.